Today on Real Estate Backstage, a strong jobs report and higher than expected inflation makes it less likely that the Fed will cut rates again anytime soon. The Department of Housing and Urban Development plans to slash about half of its workforce. A debate over days on market heats up across the country, and a broker in New York files a lawsuit against Zillow. Now, before we jump in, if you're watching this on YouTube or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure to subscribe. That way you don't miss any future episodes of the show. And you can find the show notes with links to all the articles that we're going to cover today at realestatebackstage.com/episode 18. Now, if this is your first time watching or listening, I'm your host. I'm Michael Smith. I'm the CEO and broker in charge here at Bluefield Realty Group. We are a 3-time Inc. 5000 company headquartered here in Greenville, South Carolina, and we offer real estate brokerage, property management, and insurance services. Now, before we get to the news, I have a story that I want to share with you guys. I learned something new this past week. Apparently, you can purchase fake, spammy, negative backlinks to your competitor's website in order to sabotage their SEO efforts. Now, SEO is search engine optimization. I'll give you a little bit of context here. So if you were to go to Google and type in homes for sale in Greenville, South Carolina, the first 2 to 3 results are paid ads, and then everything below that is what we call the organic rankings. Search engine optimization is anything that you do to try to get your website to rank higher up in the Google search results. Now, I learned the hard way this past week. Apparently, you can actually spend money. There's this whole business model, these companies that will create these spammy backlinks to your competitor's website to lower the domain authority with Google so that it ranks lower in the organic search results. So over the past couple months or so, I've really been going down the rabbit hole, spending a lot of time researching, learning as much as I can about SEO, because we're making some changes to our website. And also, over the next several years, we're really making a concerted effort to rely less and less on third parties like Zillow and Realtor.com and bring more of our lead generation in-house under our website, bluefieldgroup.com. So we have more control over it, and we're less subject to the whims of any changes that these third-party companies decide to make. Now, as part of this research process, I did what's called a site audit. I used a third party called SEMrush, but there are other providers out there. There's Ahrefs, there's SimilarWeb. There's these companies you can do to run a site audit and find things like broken links on your website that you need to fix, pages that have duplicate meta tags and things like that. But one of the things that it checks for is all of the referring domains, so all the other websites out there that have links to your website. And it will detect the backlinks that it thinks are spammy that are actually going to hurt your rankings with Google. So luckily, I was able to find these, and Google Search Console has something called a disavow tool. So you can actually upload a file of all the domains that you want Google to ignore and basically say, hey, Google, just don't even pay any attention to any links to our website from these domains. So, unfortunately, someone out there had spent some money to create these spammy backlinks to try and hurt our SEO rankings, but luckily we were able to undo the damage through Google Search Console by uploading that list of domains that we want Google to disavow. So here's the moral to the story. There are 2 ways to have the tallest building in town. You could either build a taller building for yourself, or you could try to tear everyone else's building down. Don't be that person. Don't spend your time, your energy, your money trying to harm your competitors. Just focus on becoming better. Focus on your own brand. Don't spread that negativity around. It's just not a good look. All right, so let's jump into the news. We're going to start with this jobs report. So according to RIS Media, quote, total non-farm payrolls increased by 143,000 in January, while the unemployment rate ticked down slightly to 4%. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported on February 7th. Job gains were in the healthcare, retail trade, and social assistance sectors, while job losses were seen in the mining, quarrying, and oil and gas extraction industries. While the unemployment rate has been relatively steady for 7 months, wavering between 4.2 and 4.1%, the raw number of unemployed in the U.S. at 6.8 million ticked down slightly from 6.9 million last month. The report also showed an average hourly earnings gain of 4.1% over the prior 12 months. Bright MLS chief economist Lisa Sturdivant offered a partial recap and additional commentary on what today's jobs report might mean for the housing market moving forward. The labor market is on solid footing to begin 2025, she said. While there have been signs of cooling labor market conditions, such as fewer job openings, today's report indicates that the U.S. economy remained resilient to start the year. In January, the economy added 143,000 jobs, which was slightly below expectations, but job growth may have come in lower than predicted because of the impacts of winter storms in the east and south, as well as the wildfires in Los Angeles. Wages continue to rise faster than inflation. Although today's job report is generally positive, it actually offers up a mixed bag for the housing market. With more jobs being added in relatively high-wage sectors and overall earnings on the rise, prospective homebuyers will feel more confident heading into the spring home buying season. However, with employers still adding jobs at a healthy pace and inflation above the Fed's 2% target, the central bank is likely to keep interest rates unchanged at its meeting in March, which means mortgage rates could remain in the high 6% range heading into spring, unquote. So coupled with a relatively strong jobs report, we also had the most recent inflation data come out for the month of January. This is according to the Wall Street Journal. Quote, consumer prices rose briskly in January, extending a recent pattern of increases at the start of the year that likely derails the prospect for Federal Reserve rate cuts anytime soon. The Labor Department said Wednesday that prices rose last month by 0.5% from December on a seasonally adjusted basis. That was the largest monthly increase since August of 2023 and well ahead of economists' expectations for a milder increase of 0.3%. The gain pushed 12-month inflation to 3% in January. That marked a pickup from December when prices rose 2.9%. Markets reacted swiftly. The Dow Jones Industrial Average and the S&P 500 both fell, and bond yields jumped. Inflation has now been around these levels for some time and clearly isn't coming down decisively anymore, said Paul Ashworth, Chief North America Economist at Capital Economics. The bigger than expected increase in prices last month largely reflected higher prices for used cars and auto insurance, said Omer Sharif, founder of the research firm Inflation Insights. Core prices, which strip out volatile food and energy, rose 0.4% from December on a seasonally adjusted basis, which is the largest increase in nearly 2 years. Core inflation was up 3.3% over the year. Egg prices rose more than 15% in December, the largest increase since June of 2015. That accounted for about 2/3 of the total monthly increase in grocery prices. A bird flu outbreak is fueling the price increase. Wednesday's report was particularly discouraging because housing and rental costs, which have been moderating and are expected to continue to ease, weren't the culprit. Instead, the latest report pointed to inflationary pressures across other goods and services that had seen a slowdown in price pressures recently, unquote. So the economy has been very resilient. We're still adding jobs. The unemployment rate is ticking down. The inflation rate is ticking up. Inflation seems to be moving in the wrong direction. You almost have to wonder if the Fed regrets the rate cuts that they did towards the end of 2024. I think based on the data that we're seeing right now, I don't think there's any chance that they're going to cut rates in March. If the data continues to go this way, there's really no reason for them to cut rates at all. So I think we all just kind of have to buckle up and plan for the worst. We need to expect mortgage rates to hold steady or maybe even go up this year. When I did the episode a few weeks ago where we talked about the housing market forecast for 2025, my prediction was that we were going to see rates slowly come down over the course of the year. But if inflation is not solved, if we see the inflation rate continue to go back up, then we're probably going to see mortgage rates go up as well. However, we do have some good news when it comes to mortgage rates, and that is the spread between the 10-year yield of the Treasury and the 30-year mortgage rate has been coming down. So this is according to Housing Wire. Quote, mortgage spreads refer to the difference between the 10-year yield and the 30-year mortgage rate. Historically, these spreads can fluctuate, becoming better or worse depending on the state of the economy. When mortgage spreads widen, the gap between the 10-year yield and the 30-year mortgage rate increases, resulting in higher than normal mortgage rates. In recent history, these spreads typically range between 1.6% and 1.8%. In 2023, spreads reached as high as 3.1%. We likely would not have seen mortgage rates at 8% that year if the spreads hadn't worsened after the banking crisis. However, spreads have improved in 2024 and 2025, which is helping to limit how high mortgage rates can go this year. So what does this mean in real life terms? If we had experienced the mortgage rate spreads of 2023, mortgage rates would be 0.72% higher today. On the other hand, with regular mortgage spreads, mortgage rates would currently be about 0.68% to 0.78% lower. If we return to typical spreads, many housing issues could be resolved as home sales could grow with mortgage rates near 6% and remain stable for some time, unquote. So I've got a graph I want to put up here on the screen for those of you who are watching on YouTube, and this is from Housing Wire. This is the spread between the 10-year Treasury yield and the 30-year mortgage rate over the last couple years. The light pink line there is 2023. The red line is last year, 2024, and then the dark red line here is 2025. So if you look at about this time 2 years ago in 2023, we could see the spread was starting to come down, and then it went up pretty dramatically. This is when we had the Silicon Valley Bank issue. That really caused markets to become fearful, and one of the results of that was an increase in the spread between the 10-year and the 30-year mortgage rate. Now, since then, of course, we have seen spreads slowly come back down, and as of right now, so far this year, we are seeing spreads lower than the prior couple of years. So if the trend continues, we could see mortgage rates continue to come down, even if we don't necessarily see the 10-year yield come down. So that's something to keep an eye on. All right, so continuing on with the theme of the Federal Reserve, Fed Chair Jerome Powell recently testified before the Senate. This is according to RIS Media. Quote, taking center stage, inflation, bank regulations, the housing crisis, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau were key topics as Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell testified before the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. During Tuesday's semi-annual monetary policy report to Congress, Powell re-emphasized the Fed's position in not lowering rates. At the January 29 Fed meeting, Powell said there wouldn't be any immediate cuts, but it would depend on the, quote, incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. Before Congress, Powell reassured lawmakers that the U.S. economy remained strong, with GDP growth at 2.5%, unemployment at 4.1%, and a 2.6% increase in personal consumption expenditures. This comes as mortgage rates remain elevated, keeping homeownership out of reach for many Americans. Senator Jim Banks, a Republican from Indiana, pointed out that home prices in some states have increased over 60% in the past 5 years, leaving 3/4 of Americans unable to afford an average home in their neighborhood. He asked Powell how Fed decisions on monetary policy could affect these families. Powell acknowledged the affordability crisis, but argued that the Fed does not set mortgage rates, only interest rates. Quote, nonetheless, we're having an effect on the housing market, and that'll unwind as we normalize policy. But we're still going to be faced with high insurance costs, high material costs, and labor shortages, and all the things that keep driving housing prices up across the country, answered Powell, unquote. Okay, so I do believe that the Fed has done a lot of damage to the housing market, but not because of how high rates are now. I think the damage was really caused by how low they brought rates back in 2020 in the immediate aftermath of COVID and how long they held them there. The fact that so many people had mortgage rates under 3% is really what created the lock-in effect. There was no need for them to react as much as they did and to keep their policy as loose for as long as they did. Yes, in March of 2020, when the whole world shut down and the unemployment rate jumped to 15%, the Fed wanted to take action to prevent us from going into a recession, or at least to prevent us from going into as bad of a recession as it could have been, or maybe staying in a recession as long as we could have. So I certainly think the Fed should have taken some action, but the economy rebounded pretty darn quickly. And even after we had really, really great economic indicators, the Fed kept rates really, really low, what I feel, for too long. The fact that we have so many people that had interest rates below 3%, below 4%, that created this whole lock-in effect. It created the whole issue of not enough inventory. Really, it exacerbated the existing issue of inventory shortages that we've been seeing for like a decade. I think the real systemic issue is on the supply side of the equation, the fact that we just haven't built enough new homes, over the last 10 years or so. And that was exacerbated by a lot of homeowners being able to, purchase or refinance at insanely low mortgage rates that we'll probably never see again in our lifetime. So I think the Fed probably brought rates too low and held them there for too long in the immediate aftermath during COVID. And you combine the monetary policy of the Fed with the fiscal policy of Congress, with all the stimulus money that they did during COVID to try and heat the economy up. And I think those two things combined really set us up for a lot of problems. All right, so let's move on to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So this is according to Inman. Quote, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development will eliminate half of its workforce as part of the Trump administration's latest effort to reduce federal costs, Bloomberg reported late Thursday night. Antonio Gaines, president of HUD's union, AFGE National Council 222, told Bloomberg that these job cuts will significantly impact employees in offices that enforce civil rights laws, compile housing market data, and fund disaster recovery efforts. The Federal Housing Administration, FHA, which provides mortgage loans, will be exempt. HUD, which supports housing assistance, fair housing practices, and community development, currently employs approximately 9,600 workers, according to its website. HUD employees were asked to justify hundreds of the agency's contracts on Monday, using a spreadsheet where workers would indicate whether the contracts involved diversity, equity, and inclusion components, or if the contractor was competent, NPR reported. The request left workers wondering if they would be next to be downsized by the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. On February 11th, President Donald Trump ordered federal agencies to begin large-scale reductions in force, prioritizing the removal of workers who perform duties not explicitly mandated by law, including those involved in DEI programs. The directive followed Trump's executive order implementing DOGE's Workforce Optimization Initiative, which mandates agencies to collaborate with DOGE to reduce federal employment and limit hiring to essential roles. The initiative also evaluates which agency or agency components could be eliminated or merged based on legal necessity. The HUD layoffs are part of a broader wave of federal restructuring. This week, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, saw major changes, including the nomination of Jonathan McKernan as director on Tuesday and the shutdown of several bureau's functions, unquote. All right, so Elon Musk, Doge, at the directive of President Trump, is now turning their sights on HUD. The newly confirmed director of HUD, Scott Turner, is collaborating on them with this effort. So HUD currently employs about 9,600 people, almost 10,000 people, and the plan is to cut that by half. Now, it does specifically say that those involved in FHA are exempt, so this should not impact FHA mortgages, which is great news for us real estate agents. However, there are a lot of really important things that HUD does, enforcement of civil rights laws, things like that. I think we can all agree that you could probably get away with cutting a certain percentage of the people at HUD and these other federal agencies without really having an impact on the actual service being provided to the American people. Now, is 50% the right number? I don't know. Maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 30%, maybe it's 80%. I mean, when Elon Musk purchased Twitter, he let go of 80% of the staff. And guess what? Twitter still works just fine. Now, am I advocating for us to cut 80% of the workforce of the federal government? Maybe, but not overnight. Would it be better for them to maybe start with smaller cuts and work their way up rather than, making such big dramatic cuts? Could we potentially see some negative consequences from this? Absolutely. I think the philosophy that Donald Trump and company are implementing here is move quickly and break things. Many people are pointing out that, hey, HUD is not a tech startup. Maybe this will work in Twitter and other companies like that, but a lot of people rely on HUD for very important aspects of their life. So you don't want to cause too much chaos. Maybe it's better to start with 10% cuts, 20% cuts, and slowly chip away at this. But I think part of it is, Donald Trump realizes that he has a limited amount of time to enact his agenda. Typically what we see after a presidential election like this is within a couple years, when we have the midterm elections, there's probably going to be some changes in the Congress. So as of right now, Donald Trump has a Republican House. He has a Republican Senate. He's probably trying to get as much of his agenda accomplished as he possibly can within the first 18 to 24 months before the balance of power potentially shifts in Washington. All right, so let's talk about days on market. So this is a recent article from Real Estate News. Quote, in the months since the NAR settlement went into effect, a number of other contentious issues have risen to the surface, with industry leaders and real estate professionals debating topics including association membership requirements, the value of MLSs, and the merits of the clear cooperation policy versus private listing networks. The CCP has been especially divisive, and much of the opposition to the policy centers around the idea of seller choice, a notion that has led some in the industry to revisit one of the more basic aspects of a real estate listing, days on market. Unlike other listing details such as price or square footage, days on market may be more complicated than it seems. When does it start, and is it the same as days on the MLS? Is there a defined standard, or is it more subjective? Are there ethical or legal consequences for conflating or misrepresenting this information? And how can DOM work for or against buyers or sellers? The second you have a listing agreement and you start holding the property out to the public for purchase, that's a day on the market, said Gary Pickering, a founding partner and attorney with South Carolina-based Blair, Cato, Pickering, Casterline, and a board member of the Real Estate Commission of the South Carolina Department of Labor Licensing and Regulation. Shout out to Gary. There's a difference between days on market and days on MLS. The problem is that real estate agents are confounding the two and saying it's the same thing, but it's not, unquote. In a recent LinkedIn post, James Dwiggins, co-founder and CEO of NextHome, backs up Pickering's premise, adding that even if a listing is not on the MLS but is being shared with the brokerage internally, days on market is happening. He goes further, suggesting that not accurately tracking this metric or misrepresenting it to clients could be deemed as fraud and a violation of NAR's Code of Ethics. However, NAR's own language suggests that there is some flexibility for MLSs and brokers to determine when days on market starts. Brian Schneider, partner at Arent Fox Schiff and legal counsel for Bright MLS, told Real Estate News that there is no common standardized definition for days on market, and there can even be variation among home search portals and public websites depending on the data available to them. It's up to the website how to calculate that, he said, unquote. So high days on market can be harmful to sellers, obviously. If a buyer's looking at a property that's been on the market for a long time, that is a signal to them that they can maybe come in low. Maybe there's something wrong with the property, or maybe the seller's a little desperate at this point and they'd be willing to consider a lower offer than they otherwise would have. And artificially low days on market can be harmful to buyers because that signals to them, this is a brand new listing and I, maybe have to come in a little bit stronger when submitting an offer than I would have if it had been sitting on the market for a while. I know some agents, they have the practice of, if a listing has been on the market for an extended period of time, they will attempt to take it down, relist it with a different MLS number to make it look like a brand new listing. I recommend things like a slight price adjustment, maybe using different photos, altering the listing description. There's nothing wrong with trying to refresh your listing, but if you are intentionally trying to reset the clock, making it look like a brand new listing with no days on market, it's a bit of a gray area, but I think you could possibly make the case that could be unethical, maybe even illegal. Is days on market one of those things that we have a legal obligation to accurately portray? I don't know. That's a good question. But this debate has definitely been heating up recently, and I'd love to get your take on it. So if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and drop a comment below. What do you think? Is days on market one of those things that we have a legal and ethical obligation to 100% make sure that we are presenting in an accurate way? And when does days on market actually start? Is it when you get the listing agreement signed? When you start marketing the property internally within your brokerage, which is allowed under the Clear Cooperation Policy? Is it when you start marketing it to the public, which can be one day before it goes in the MLS, according to the Clear Cooperation Policy? Or is days on market when you put it in the MLS? So go ahead and drop a comment below. Let me know what you guys think about that. All right, so I want to wrap up with this. A New York broker has filed a lawsuit against Zillow. This is according to Inman. Quote, a New York City broker filed a class action lawsuit against Zillow this week, alleging that the company's Street Easy apartment platform effectively hid rental listings, but still charged a daily fee to the agent. George T. Spyridakis, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, an associate broker with EXP, filed his complaint in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Washington in Seattle, near Zillow's headquarters. Spyridakis alleged he paid $7 daily for each listing, and that he has listed over 250 properties for rent or for sale on Street Easy, but that listings on occasion have been masked from public view. Zillow allows multiple listing realtors to list the same property for rent at the same time on its Street Easy platform, charging each listing realtor $7 per day, Spyridakis said in his complaint. He alleged that only the most recent rental listing would be displayed on the platform, masking or otherwise removing from public view all prior listing realtors, while continuing to charge the prior listing realtor the $7 per day fee for the listing. In New York, multiple brokers can advertise the same unit, but Street Easy policies appear to seek to prevent that from happening. Only one copy of a rental listing is permitted on Street Easy, the company's listing quality policy says. We will not approve the same unit to be advertised by more than one brokerage, landlord, or owner. Spyridakis has alleged the masking occurred on numerous occasions, causing him to lose business in addition to its daily advertising fee paid to Zillow, unquote. So, I'm not familiar with how rental listings work in New York, but, even here in South Carolina, we can theoretically do open listing agreements, non-exclusive listing agreements, where more than one agent can have the same property listed at the same time. That is perfectly legal here within the state of South Carolina. I would assume that's probably the case in many other states as well. And I can understand Street Easy, which is a Zillow website, only wanting to have that property show up one time. It would be really confusing to a customer if they're on a portal website doing a search and they see the same exact unit show multiple times in the feed. That just wouldn't be a good customer experience. So I can certainly understand Zillow or StreetEasy only wanting to show one of those listings to the consumer. However, there should be some checks and balances in place to make sure that they're not continuing to charge that $7 per day to someone if they're not actually displaying their listing on the website. They should easily be able to make sure that they're only charging that fee to the agent whose listing is visible to the public. All right, y'all, that's a wrap for today. Just a reminder, you can find the show notes with links to all the articles we referenced today at realestatebackstage.com/episode 18. And I'll see you guys here next week with another behind the scenes look at the real estate industry here on Real Estate Backstage.